nostalgia is about like what makes life beautiful, right? Like this, our nostalgic memories are part of what makes life beautiful. And so we have a bunch of, as I noted, we have a bunch of mundane memories that are, it's not like these are useless memories. Like it's good to know. It's good, for instance, that I know how to drive to the grocery store and like what aisle things are on. It's like, you don't want, it's good to habituate, right? And to be able to know, to have that kind of level of memory. But that's not what really enriches life and adds that layer of color to life. And I think so, I think nostalgia memories are beautiful memories. I think that's a good way to say it.
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by John Templeton Foundation and Templeton Religion Trust. Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of Season 3. Our focus for this season is going to be yearning. And we're going to look at some of the various ways in which we're driven by our longing for beauty. I thought the best place to start might be to look at our yearning for beautiful memories, which is one way to define the concept of nostalgia. My guest for this episode is one of the world's leading experts on nostalgia, Dr. Clay Routledge. Clay is the Vice President of Research and Director of the Human Flourishing Lab at Archbridge Institute. He's also co-editor-in-chief of Perfectus, a magazine on human progress and flourishing. And prior to joining Archbridge Institute, Clay spent nearly 2 decades in academia as a professor of psychology, professor of management, and distinguished professor of business. As a leading expert in existential psychology and human motivation, Clay's work focuses on helping people reach their full potential and building meaningful lives. He's a highly cited researcher who has published more than 100 scholarly papers, authored several books, and published several articles in popular outlets such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and more. And he's received numerous awards for his research and mentorship. His latest book is Past Forward: How Nostalgia Can Help You Live a More Meaningful Life. In our conversation, we talk about the relationship between beauty and nostalgia and some surprising findings from his research, including how nostalgia leads us to connect more deeply with others and how it can be a driver of innovation. Let's get started. All right, Clay, thanks for joining us on the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, great. Well, listen, to get started, I had sent you a question to think about, which I think ties in very well to your work on nostalgia. Can you think of an experience of profound beauty that comes to your mind from your childhood and something that lingers with you till today, something you might perhaps go back to from time to time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And because it got me thinking about how I live, like kind of my lifestyle now, which is I live out in the woods and, I'm very, very, I wouldn't consider myself like a hardcore outdoors person. I don't do like a ton of camping and things like that, for instance, but like I really, really value just daily walks on trails and in nature. And, that's a big part of like lifestyle experience that's meaningful to me. Like compared to I love cities, I love urban environments too, but like my preference is kind of to be out in nature as much as I can. And then I had to, and so that provoked me thinking about, I didn't really like grow up doing that kind of stuff. I grew up in, a fairly like small city, but kind of more urban environment. And then I remembered my parents took us on this trip to Colorado when we were kids. And that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Like you took this road trip to Colorado. So what? Well, my family didn't have a lot of money. We didn't go on a lot of vacations. Most of the vacations we did were very local or very regional. They were just what we could get to in a couple hours. And so it was kind of a big deal to pack up in the car and go on this, I don't know, it's probably like a 10 or 11 hour drive to Colorado from Missouri where we lived. And I just remember going to like Pikes Peak, Garden of the Gods, these places, and just being like, oh, I'd never seen anything like this. The topography was so different than, where I lived in kind of a flat area. And I think that kind of stuck with me. It's like, oh, that you can have these beautiful spaces, these beautiful outdoor spaces, And then when I was really thinking about that memory more, and I think this is a little bit of a hint as to, maybe what we'll talk about with nostalgia, what I realized was at the time I didn't really care that much. Like I was a kid, and I was like, oh, this is fun, but it wasn't. My parents were making a big production about it, but I didn't care that much. But looking back on it now, I've layered in all my experience growing up, being an adult, having children myself, getting to choose like my own like lifestyle preferences. And then I really started to think, oh, oftentimes the way nostalgia works is it's not that moment in time itself was super impactful in the moment. It's the making sense of it, realizing that was a big deal for my parents, that actually was a big financial sacrifice. Like we didn't have a lot of money. And so that social component, that like how that connects me to people, all of that it comes from my retrospection and me like making sense of it and sort of injecting it with meaning. And so, yeah, that's the memory that I think is probably, influenced a lot of my current preferences, even though I hadn't really put a lot of thought of until you gave me that reason to think about it. So thank you.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Well, it's a really fascinating connection you make to that experience with your family, because often when people talk about connection to nature, it seems like an intrinsic relationship, right? With just the beauty of nature and feeling maybe a sense of awe or, just a sense of unity with the natural world. And I think of, people who maybe took that a little too far, the transcendentalists, people like Thoreau and Emerson, and you have this sense of wanting to maybe reject urban life and really sort of value this connection to nature. And there's a kind of nostalgia there, right? To like wanting a simpler way of life that maybe reflects something true about the human condition, truer than what we find in our artificially created environments, perhaps.
So last year at the Human Flourishing Lab, we conducted this survey looking at what Americans think about the past. And we surveyed, what was interesting about this is we were asking people of all different generations. So the young adults, Gen Z, all the way up to older Americans. And we asked, and we were specifically interested in the relationship with technology. And we asked them to what extent they would like to go back to a time before everyone was like so plugged in, to social media, for instance. And if you ask people in advance, like to make a prediction, most of us would probably say, well, the older people are going to be cranky and be like, oh, we need to go back and get rid of this stuff. And younger people are going to be more enthusiastic about modernity. And actually what we found is Gen Z was very highly nostalgic for that simpler time before everyone was plugged in. So even though it was their digital natives and it was before their own lives, that they remember, there was a sense of nostalgia for a time, but before like we were so plugged in. So I think you're absolutely right. There's something about this yearning for a simpler life where maybe people were doing more face-to-face, more hands-on, more analog things. And so I think that seems to transcend the generations. It's not just something that older people feel. It turns out that a lot of younger people feel that way. And in fact, if you look at some consumer trends, it's Gen Z that's driving a lot of the consumption of analog products, including like collecting vinyl records and CDs and buying other sorts of things that maybe seem a little bit outdated now.
Yeah, well, I want to double click on this a little bit and get a better sense of what you think is going on. Well, let's start with maybe tell us a little bit about your own journey into the field of psychology and what drew you to that, and then existential psychology in particular, and then the study of nostalgia.
When I was in college, I didn't even know, I'd never even heard of existential psychology, but I became very interested in the idea of mental time travel. Even as an undergrad, I was fascinated with this idea that time is something that you can measure objectively. In fact, we have extremely precise clocks now, right? But it's also a subjective experience. And we've all had this experience where time flies or time drags on. We've all had the experience of like, we look back on our lives and we're like, oh, where did the time go? And so I became fascinated with that idea, like the subjective experience of time. And really what I was interested in is, that more kind of practical level of what are the sort of data inputs into our brain, maybe that give us our sense of time. So it's very like different
Hmm.
than, anything existential. But then I went to grad school and, I kind of started doing something else, but then I came back around to this idea of time when I discovered existential psychology, particularly the writings of the cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker. And what Becker proposed is one of the advanced cognitive capacities that distinguishes our species is our ability to introspect, right? Our high levels of self-awareness. It's not that other organisms aren't self-aware, but we're extremely self-aware, right? Well, on top of that, we have this ability to move the self through time. So we can think about our futures and we can think about our past. This is important for the advancement of civilization. This is key to human progress. Like, you're a college professor. I'm sure you've had experiences where there's students in your classes that, like, I'm sure your lectures are enthralling and students just love to be there intrinsically. But as you know, a lot of them are there because they're able to think about the future and they're like, I don't want to go to class at 9 a.m., but in 4 years, I would like to have a college degree. So that's just so
Hmm.
critical to personal growth, but also human progress, the ability to think about and plan for the future. But what Becker pointed out is that benefit, that blessing, so to speak, comes at a cost, which is our awareness of our inevitable demise, right? We're existentially aware that
Right.
one day we're going to die. That's really what I was interested in when I got into grad school and started thinking about time, is our relationship with our own destiny of physical mortality
Mm.
and what that does to a person. And so I'm a psychologist, and so I was really interested in like the psychological effects, like anxiety. So and it's true. Some people have extreme existential anxiety because of these concerns. Most of us don't, though. Most of us get up every day. We move forward. We even take risks and do all sorts of bold things, despite the fact that we know that we could be killed at any moment for any reason, for reasons we can't predict or control. Um, and so
Mm.
how do we navigate that space? Well, according to Becker and then a bunch of other researchers, following that, like, we invest in systems of meaning, right? Like, it helps us to feel like, well, yeah, I'm just a speck of, I'm just a speck of dust in the cosmos, but I can be part of something bigger. I can have a meaningful impact on the world. So my initial like exploration into existential psychology started very much focused on time, but on what are the implications of being an organism capable of imagining the future. And then that kind of led to, oh, well, if we can imagine, if we think about the future, we also think about the past. And maybe those two things are connected. Maybe the fears and uncertainties and anxieties we have about the future provoke us to look to the past for comfort and perhaps even guidance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's great. And so, yes, that makes sense. Then you would look at nostalgia, I suppose, as yeah, looking to the past, perhaps to pacify our our anxieties in the present. And yeah, I was really surprised to see one of your findings on how it's not simply a matter of uh, a kind of coping mechanism for the present, but even a planning resource for the future, right? And before we go there, though, could you talk a little bit about how you as a psychologist conceptualize nostalgia, right? Because a lot of people think of nostalgia as just sort of kind of a wistful
Mhm.
longing, right? Like a yearning for times
Yeah.
past, often pleasant experiences from the past. How is that different from what you're looking at, or how is it similar to what you're looking at?
take nostalgia outside of this, beyond the self, and connect it to the broader world in our history. But really, what most of my research has focused on is the personal nostalgia. And the way we conceptualize that is, you can think of nostalgia as really like a cocktail of cognition, emotion, and then I would add motivation. And so cognition, nostalgia involves our memories. These are our autobiographical memories. And so when we feel nostalgic, we often bring to mind certain types of experiences, and we've cataloged these. Now we've done, we've actually probably had tens of thousands, if not more, like narrative collections from people all over the world, just asking them to share with us their nostalgic memories. And so we have kind of a sense of like what the prototypical types of memories are, like what types of memories people tend to be nostalgic about. Of course, there's great variability as a function of culture, age, gender, all those things. But there is a common sort of understanding of nostalgia, which I can get into that. So that's the cognitive. But then there's like the emotional part, which is like the nostalgia is a bittersweet emotional experience. So it is happy memory. Like, we do tend to think about things that were good times, but just like humans like stories of drama. Like, if you go to a movie, for instance, if the movie was just 2 hours of pure, like, going from strength to strength, right? Like 2 hours of joy and just people winning. It's actually not a very good movie. A good movie is one where there's triumph over tragedy, where maybe things are going well, but they have a major barrier or setback. They get knocked down. And then you get to see their character. You get to see their resilience. You get to see them grow, learn from mistakes. So our nostalgic memories are often like that. They can even be things that at the time were really stressful, but later we look back on and we're like, oh, well, yeah, even though at that Thanksgiving dinner we were fighting and my mom was really stressed out because something got burned or whatever, like, we also laughed and that was a really meaningful time together. And actually, it turns out that was the last time, I got to see grandpa or something like that. So there's this cocktail of sadness, loss, but also with appreciation, gratitude, joy. So there's that emotional complexity. And then I would add like a motivational component, like, which gets to that yearning point that you're talking about. It's like, we don't just bring to mind the cognitions, the memories, and reflect on them neutrally. They're emotional. But in addition to that, we don't just passively do it. Like, oftentimes we're provoked to be nostalgic because we're unsatisfied with something, or where we feel lonely, distressed, uncertain about what path to take in life. And so what we're doing is we're yearning for guidance, really, is what I think. Like, we're yearning for inspiration. We're trying to reconnect with what we cherish. And so when we're trying to make decisions about how to go forward in our lives, should I take this job? Should I move to this city? What? I have all these competing possibilities. What should I privilege? Nostalgic memories can remind us that, these were the things that actually matter to us. Right. These are the cherished memories, and it's worth bringing that to mind when we're trying to figure out how to go forward. That was not like something I always thought about. Like, when we first started doing nostalgia research, we very much conceptualized it as a psychological defense mechanism that largely functioned to like regulate our emotions. So when we feel sad or lonely, nostalgia comforts us, and then we can move forward, and that's great. So we thought nostalgia was healthy, but we thought of it as like a coping, like you would think of as a coping resource. But then what we, collecting all these narratives, running experiments, what we started to notice is when people shared nostalgic memories, they didn't just say, oh, this, looking back on this memory, like, makes me feel good. They said things like, it makes me optimistic about the future. It reminds me what I'm fighting for. Like, it gives me hope. So we started to see these more motivated affective components in people's narratives. And we're like, we should study that. Of course, you're only going to discover in an experimental research, you're only going to discover what you measure. We hadn't been measuring motivational tendencies. We had just been measuring well-being. And so then we said, okay, well, maybe if you induce nostalgia in the lab, for instance, maybe it doesn't just increase positive mood. Maybe it doesn't just increase like a sense of meaning in life. maybe it makes people more motivated to pursue their goals. Maybe it makes them actually want to go out in the world and do things. And so we started to discover, for instance, that nostalgia makes people feel more connected because it reminds them that, oh yeah, even though I'm going through a difficult time now, there's people that love me and I have all these memories with these people. That's true. But it also turns out it makes people want to connect. We engineered these studies where we gave people the opportunity, like after doing the nostalgia manipulation and then doing some other tasks, we gave them the opportunity, or we led them to believe that they had the opportunity to participate in other studies. And we gave them choices. There weren't even other studies, but what we said is like, oh, here's a study where you'll have to go in. It's a social study. You'll have to interact with people. Here's a study where you'll do things by yourself. And what we found is inducing nostalgia made people more likely to choose to participate in the study where they got to interact with other people. So that's just one example. But nostalgia pushes people towards others. So it very much has like a motivational component that really is counter to the stereotype of being nostalgic is just sitting by yourself and like ruminating or reflecting on the past. And it's a more energizing like experience that makes you want to, think about like even if you watch a nostalgic movie or something, that might trigger like, oh, I should call up this person and talk. We watched that together back in the day, or you see this kind of thing a lot in nostalgic entertainment. Like it creates a moment, like a social media kind of moment or something where people want to share that experience. So that's what I'd say. In addition to the cognition and emotion, there is this like energetic or motivational component.
Yeah. Could you say a bit more about the relationship between nostalgia and yearning? And you mentioned the affective component as well. So is nostalgia a type of yearning, or is it, is there kind of a partial overlap with that concept of yearning or longing? What's that relationship like?
Yeah, I would say yearning or longing is a component of nostalgia. Like nostalgia is a complex experience, and yearning is part of it. It's not the whole story. Like you can yearn for things and not necessarily feel nostalgic for them. But I think a big part of what's going on in nostalgia is there is that yearning, there is that longing component. But one thing that I think that often people get wrong about that is like people who are very, very critical of nostalgia. And understandably, there are some reasons to be critical of certain forms of nostalgia. But I think people overestimate the idea that when people are yearning for the past, they want to return to the past. And those are not the same. Those are not the same thing. Like people might want to revisit the past or pull wisdom or knowledge or experience from the past, even if they have no desire to actually go back to the way things were. Most people don't, despite what they say, if you actually dig a little bit deeper, most people don't really want to go back and you don't want to live like they did 50 years ago, even though like you can do these surveys that show like, Americans think life was better in the past. They don't want to give up modern medicine or technology, or they don't want to give up the certain advances. What that yearning is saying is there is something they feel like is missing. I mean, as you know, like one of the challenges with being humans is like we're never satisfied with anything, and that's good in a sense because it means we keep tinkering and we keep trying to make the world better. Like we like progress. We want things to look. Even silly things like we watch TV and be like, oh, imagine if the picture was a little bit better, the TV was a little bit larger. Like we're always kind of wondering what could be. But that's related to the yearning too, right? And that past-oriented yearning. It's like we look back and like, well, maybe it was nice when kids could just ride their bike around the neighborhood and they weren't all like on cell phones, and like, there was a little bit more freedom. And I had that in my childhood, and I kind of wish kids could have that now. Or I remember my grandmother telling me stories when I was growing up about how she rode a horse to school. And I was like, well, I don't know that I want to ride a horse to school, but like, but just, we like these kinds of stories that like connect us to, or give us the opportunity to yearn for something, and then what I think is neat about nostalgia is that the creative components, like people don't want to ride a horse to school, but what they might want is like, more trails in their neighborhoods that there's not cars on. What I mean? Well, they might want some modern version of like, oh, it's nice not to have to deal with these certain modern inconveniences. Like, so we want those things, but we want to figure out a way to to pull in, to borrow from the past as well.
Yeah. And what's the mechanism then that you see that drives this ability of nostalgia to connect us to each other, right? Why is it not just sort of enclosing us within ourselves?
Yeah, we have this phrase we say in the nostalgic mind, the mind is peopled. And for
Mm,
some reason, like when nostalgia is really about meaningful memories. And if you ask people what gives their life meaning, they almost always say other people, or the
mm-hmm.
connection to others, family, close friends, um, the transcendent. Their even like spiritual meaning is very much about a relationship with the divine. And so
Yeah.
meaning is about like others and about connecting to others. Nostalgia kind of reminds us of that. There's all sorts of distractions in life. We have all sorts of competing motives. And what nostalgia does, it's like, oh yeah, but these were the special times. These are the things that are really meaningful. And those, what's the common theme of those? And this gets to that cognitive component of nostalgia. When we looked across all these different memories from people all over the world, most nostalgic memories involve other people, and particularly
Mm,
loved ones. People can have nostalgic memories for solitary experiences, but they're fairly rare, actually. I mean, people
mm,
can say,
mm,
oh, I climbed that mountain myself, and that really revealed something about me, and I was training for this for a long time.
mm.
That
Yeah.
can happen, but it's fairly rare. Most of the time, even in nostalgic memories of personal accomplishments, people bring their attention towards others. These are the people that helped me accomplish. Like, this was my support system. These are the people that helped me
Yeah.
accomplish this triumph. And so I think a big part of why it pushes us towards others is because it reminds us that others are like where meaning is. And then it's like, oh, okay, so I should go out and do things. And in fact, so from like a research point of view, we've done studies and showing that when people reflect on a nostalgic memory, it makes them, they bring to mind experiences of social success, which boosts their confidence, their social efficacy.
Mm,
They feel like, oh, okay, like I'm going through a tough time right now. I'm lonely right now. I moved to a new city. I started university on the other side of the country. I don't know anyone, but I've had all these social successes in the past, which means I can do it. Like,
yeah. Yeah.
I can do
Yeah.
it. And that
Yeah.
kind of energizes people to have the confidence to be like, okay, well, I can go meet new people. I can start relationships. And so I think that it provides us with that kind of confidence.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to get some of my kids to make new friends, and they're resisting it. I'm like, this will help you in the future. You'll
Right?
see.
You're planting the
um,
seed.
yeah, well, trying to. I don't know if I'll succeed, but so say a little bit about the just on this conceptual point. I mean, are all memories nostalgic? Are there certain memories that are not nostalgic? And is there any kind of time scope? Right? Can I be nostalgic for something from this morning, or is it time bounded in some way?
Yeah, great questions. So not all memories are nostalgic. We have different types of memories, and so, for instance, when we've done these experiments, oftentimes as control conditions, we'll have people bring to mind, or we say think about a memory that makes you feel nostalgic, right? Or in another condition, think about a memory that you would describe as ordinary or mundane. And then even in another condition, we'll say, think about a memory like a pleasant or happy memory from the past. Even happy memories aren't the same as nostalgic. Like when you look at the
Hmm.
effects of these, like using the like having them think about something that's cherished or like like a nostalgic memory, like has more powerful effects than just having them think about a happy memory. So there's something about nostalgic memories that seem to be distinct from other type of autobiographical memories.
Hmm.
As far as like the time question, it's really interesting because there are no rules. Like you can be nostalgic about anything, but it's true that you tend to be more nostalgic by things that are the further separated you are, both in temporal and physical distance.
Hmm.
And so you're more likely to be nostalgic if you move for a place if you don't see it every day. And I think if you're not there a lot. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
this has
Yeah.
to do with that specialness. Like if it's routine, if it's part you don't even routine things that you like. You don't need to feel nostalgic about the gym if you go there every day. You're like, I'm going to go there.
Right.
I'm going there, right? The most powerful nostalgic memories tend to be the ones that are distal, like,
Hmm.
that's time too. Like the further time that separates it, the more you feel like, oh, there's something special about accessing that. And I think another part of the time, I don't know for sure, but know this for sure because this is hard to test. But I think another element of the time component is you've had more time to sit with it, to make sense of it, to, reflect on it multiple times, and to, so to draw different lessons from it. And that's one of the things that I found interesting is like, you can have a nostalgic memory from, 30 years ago, something that happened 30 years ago. And maybe like 5 years after it happened, you do feel nostalgic for it. Like it was a really important thing. Then 10 years after, you're in a different point in your life and you're like, oh, I didn't realize that. Now, like I gave the example of like Thanksgiving. Now that I have kids, I realize, oh, this means something different. And so as we age, when we go through different life experiences, the same memory can take on new meaning. You might have this experience with like a really good book or a great, film, where it's like you liked it, and then you go back and watch it later and you're like, oh, I didn't even pick up on that because I didn't know. I wasn't at a place in my life to really appreciate that theme. Yeah. Our own stories are like that, I think. And so you can kind of have this ongoing relationship with nostalgia. In addition to that, one of the things that I've thought about more recently is how nostalgia for people that we've lost, for people that are gone, similarly allows us to keep that relationship going in new ways. Like my dad died several years ago. And, now I look back on different memories, even memories as a kid where I was probably an annoying kid who didn't appreciate the lessons my dad was trying to teach me. And I can look back now and say, oh, okay, I get it. And so I have this ongoing like dialogue with my dad, even though he's deceased. It's because he left me like all those memories, And so I think that's a neat feature too. It's like we can kind of even when something's gone, even when a place is gone, a person is gone, some part of our life is gone, we have it. Like we can kind of, and that, that's one reason why we're terrified of cognitive decline, right? Like it's a very, very existentially like threatening idea that we might lose our memories, our sense of self, because, we want we long to keep those stories, those memories as part of us, because not just because it's nice to look back on them, but we use them. Like it's an ongoing dialogue with our past.
Hey everyone, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation so far. This is a great stopping point for the first half of our episode. Stay tuned for the second half next week, where Clay talks about how nostalgia can be a driver of innovation, as well as offers tips on how to harness the power of nostalgia in your own life. To make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already, and please leave us a review. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. See you next week.